Hey YouTube, Dandy here. Mighty Number 9 is the spiritual successor to Mega Man, co-developed by Concept and Inti Creates. It started out as the new Mega Man game the fans always wanted, following the neglect of the series by its publisher Capcom. But over time, people's perception of the game changed, and the game was ultimately panned by Mega Man fans and critics alike. I initially wanted to post this video a few days after launch, but then I remembered my review of Halo 5 Story, which I uploaded on launch day. I simply didn't have enough time to make a comprehensive analysis. I'm sure you've heard about all the controversies, what with the delays, the pizza graphics, the prom night joke, and overall mismanagement of the project. But here I am, free of any biases, to give the most reasonable critique of this game that I can possibly muster. So let's get started. The gameplay. Well, I mean, look at it. You jump, shoot, dodge insta-kill spikes, steal bosses' weapons when you defeat them and use them to knock down other bosses like a stack of dominoes. There's 8 initial bosses, you can choose which order you go through the stages. It's a Mega Man game, and I will treat it as such. I feel like the most important part of a Mega Man game is how it controls, and I'm happy to say that Mighty Number 9's controls are exactly like a Mega Man game's. The ascent and descent of your jump, the velocity of your shots and mid-air control are absolutely spot on, so long-time fans will not need to readjust themselves. Mighty Number 9 has no shame in the fact that it is a Mega Man knockoff, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I know some people may have wanted something new from this game, but come on, that would have defeated the point of Mighty Number 9. As the Masterclass trailer so flamboyantly told us, the game features dashing. But it doesn't function the same as in the Mega Man games. You can't do a dash attack and you can't dash upwards, but you can spiral downwards and you can dash infinitely. I only really used downward spiral to dodge one of the final boss's attacks, but remember that pressing down left or down right on a D-pad for whatever reason does not constitute a down dash but a forwards dash. I also hate that you cannot change your trajectory during the downward spiral. There also happens to be a crouch dash that is really only used a whopping once in the entire game. Wouldn't it have made more sense to make the regular dash lower by default instead of wasting precious time on this pointless mechanic that's only used once? But believe it or not, even though you do not fall during a dash, infinite dashing doesn't actually defeat the point of platforming because there will always be enemies, hazards, and platforming itself to prevent you from avoiding platforming. The key thing about dashing is assimilation, where after an enemy sustains enough damage, they light up and get stunned, allowing you to kill them by dashing into them. You can get energy, points, and power-ups from doing this, so alright, cool. It is extremely gimmicky though. There was nothing wrong with simply shooting an enemy to death, but now you have to do this extra step, even on bosses. The thing about dashing into bosses is that you do it multiple times throughout the fight, and if you take too long to do a dash, the boss regenerates their health. This is especially annoying if the boss has a means of keeping a distance from you. Sadly, there's no wall jump, but at least you get an edge grab. It's not nearly as useful, but it's better than no edge grab. I think the Mighty Number bosses are pretty well made for the most part. They feel like Mega Man bosses because you can take their weapons and they are weak to particular stolen weapons, but the fights are just very Mega Man-y in general. This is because bosses have a variety of strategies to use against a player, and the player has to balance attacking the boss with dodging their attacks. They will usually telegraph their attacks, so if you die it's probably your fault. When you defeat one of the 8 main bosses, you don't destroy them, but rather cure them of their malfunctions using the power of unknown plot device and take them back to the lab. Because of this, a defeated boss may show up in a stage to help clear out a hazard or some enemies, but only if that level's boss is weak to the weapon of a defeated boss. Reminds me of how levels in the original Mega Man X would change depending on which levels you've cleared, except it's not nearly as fleshed out here because in that game, the levels could change some aesthetics, whole areas, and give you easier access to new areas. It doesn't change the gameplay at all, and most of these characters are too annoying for me to respect the end result. I'll get into characters later. The boss weapons are pretty okay. There are some useless ones like mics and pyros which are really only useful for challenge mode, but a lot of these weapons have application outside of bosses. Dina's weapon fires multiple projectiles at different angles that continuously zaps targets, and if multiple projectiles hit a single target then they just get trashed up. Bat's weapon is basically a remotely detonated crash bomber that's even more OP. Cryo's weapon freezes enemies and has bullet drop, so it's useful for picking off enemies at an angle. Shade's weapon does massive damage, ricochets off of surfaces, and locks onto enemies. If you use it right, this is actually as broken as the Metal Blade from Mega Man 2, I shit you not. But then there's some weirder weapons. Seasoned Mega Man veterans may expect Brand's sword to be the most powerful weapon in the game if the X, Zero, and ZX games are anything to go by, but no. It is almost useless as a weapon. What it is used as is a shield, because you can parry 99% of all attacks. This is the final boss. Nothing is happening to me. Arvy's weapon is similarly impractical as a weapon. This sort of movement pattern cannot be used as an effective weapon. Instead, holding the attack button will increase your jump height and slow your descent. Mike's weapon turns Beck into some kind of bulldozer, and the attack is just Beck proceeding to VTech forwards and ram everything in his path. In the campaign, its only use is to fight Brand, but it is actually effective in the challenge missions because only they have long and flat terrain necessary to hit top speed. Pyro's weapon is proper shit though. It creates an explosion where Beck is, and you get a larger explosion the longer you hold the attack button. As an area of effect weapon, it is completely trumped by Shade's weapon, and since larger explosions take more energy, it's not even good against the boss it's supposed to be used against, unless you enjoy using incremental point-blank range explosions. There's some flaws with the weapon system in general. Firstly, unlike many Mega Man games, Mighty No. 9 doesn't give you a demo of the weapon you received that shows you the application of your new equipment. Because of this, some players may take some time before they realize that they need to use equipment X to do Y in order to progress through the penultimate level. But easily the worst design choice with the weapons is not letting you select your weapon in the pause menu. Instead, they force you to navigate this clunky menu using the shoulder buttons in the middle of combat. It honestly feels like micromanaging. When Mighty No. 9 2 comes around, I'd like every weapon to be useful and for a more intuitive means of switching weapons. As for the levels, they aren't masterpieces, but they get the job done, and they do have some creative platforming sprinkled about. There are some sections where dashing will propel you upwards and you have to dodge enemies and spikes. There's parts where you have to intelligently use the edge grab. There's these enemies that turn into blocks, and then nothing, and then back into blocks when you shoot them. Platforming also finds its way into boss fights, and I'm not talking about the arena's topography or putting floating blocks in the fight. I mean that dodging some of these attacks are a real test of your reflexes. Not all of the platforming lives up to the ingenuity of Mega Man, however, because a lot of it merely amounts to effortlessly jumping over randomly placed blocks. Whatever. Sometimes there is some proper bullshit though, like this place where an enemy can knock you into spikes, killing you in one hit, in spite of the after-hit invincibility. Shade's level is a non-linear one and has no checkpoints, so have fun if you die during the mission. Dina's level, for instance, requires you to crouch dash underneath these one-hit kill turbines, despite the game not even teaching you that crouch dashing is a thing, despite crouch dashing never being used in the game ever again. The worst level would have to be Cole's. The issues don't lie in the level design or the enemies, it's with Cole herself. See, there's this mission that does absolutely nothing for the plot where you have to play as Cole, and she lacks any assimilation ability, so have fun using her shitty crossbow that takes forever to kill enemies. You should also note that this game is quite short, having a measly 11 stages. If you compare this to the number of levels in most Mega Man games, it really makes you wonder what this game's $4 million budget was devoted to. Anyways, as for the game's difficulty, I'd say that I'm pretty good at Mega Man, so I didn't have too many issues playing this game aside from the occasional bullshit. However, there are people who have been playing Mega Man since the 80s and 90s, and seeing them play this game makes me wonder if they've ever touched a Mega Man game before, so accounting for that, and the notion that Mega Man is one of the hardest game franchises out there, which I disagree with, Mighty No. 9 should offer an honest and fair to moderate challenge. The game tests your platforming skills and reflexes, but sometimes it really is impossible for a player, no matter how skilled, to do some things well on the first try. Story and writing. The script is atrocious, but if they actually put some work into it, it could have been presentable. The The first thing I want to get out of the way is that there are a lot of Mega Man fans who seemingly only play Mega Man 2 and Mega Man X1 who detest the idea of a story in a Mega Man game. The main Mega Man timeline actually has so much lore, and the story is one of the best parts of the Zero, ZX and Legends games. So don't hate Mighty No. 9's story for being a story, hate it for being a bad story. The majority of this section will be spoilers, so click here if you don't want that shit. The premise is very analogous to your typical Mega Man game. You know, you got Beck aka not Mega Man, built by Dr. White aka not Dr. Light, and Beck's gotta go stop the bad robots from doing bad shit. The story is more complex than that, but I'm just pointing out the similarities wherever they are. So the game starts off by saying, it is the present year. That is not how you start a story. Anyways, every robot in the US except for Beck malfunctions and goes rampant. Now, immediately, the game chucks this Gregory Graham character at you, CEO of Cherry Dynamics, which is supposed to be the leading robot manufacturer in the world. He so obviously sounds like the bad guy, but then he starts talking about this Dr. Blackwell character. Now, while the player is thinking, who is Dr. Blackwell? Graham's video feed cuts off and is replaced with Avi being a fucking monkey. Beck also awakens to his assimilation power, which White didn't think was activated yet. Deus Ex Machina? Anyways, Beck and White retreat to the lab of Dr. Sander, some robotics engineer who does nothing for the narrative. They activate Cole aka Not Roll, who does nothing for the narrative. Then they talk to a filler character who does nothing for the narrative and engage in a conversation where they catch up Dr. Sander on information the player already knows, which, once again, does nothing for the narrative. So, just one level into a simple platforming game, and it's already full of red lights in the narrative department. You got the current year, the who are they talking about character, Dr. Blackwell, an opportunity to tell us about Blackwell being cut off by unfunny comedy, Deus Ex Machinas, filler scenes, filler characters, and nothing being explained. So, what about that Blackwell character? See, the game is quite vague about this, and it doesn't exactly state how long ago this shit happens, but from what I can gather, Dr. White made a robot called Trinity who had the same assimilation powers as Beck and could rewrite another robot's code. Coupled with her only programmed directive being to grow stronger by the means of assimilation, Trinity was in inherent danger and was locked away. Graham didn't care because he saw money in Trinity. It's never explained how, but I'm assuming he wanted to mess up his competitor's robots, so he tried to retrieve Trinity. Blackwell tried to stop Graham by the means of a cyber-terrorist attack that's never really explained, and was locked up for it. Now, in the events of this game, Graham activates Trinity, and she now controls every robot in America save for Beck and the ones who weren't activated at that point. Beck can somehow cure the other mighty numbers, but it's not explained, so I'm assuming it's something to do with assimilation or rewriting code. But after fixing the other mighty numbers, Dr. White analyzes the malicious code and realizes that it is his own code. He concludes that the robots have been corrupted by his own creation, Trinity. Immediately afterwards, Cherry Dynamics is attacked by rampant robots, so Beck and White go there. But apparently it was really important that they meet Dr. Blackwell at that specific time, so Sander and Cole break into a maximum security prison where Blackwell is detained. I don't understand why they couldn't have just met Blackwell afterwards, or why they couldn't have just went to the counter and asked for permission to speak to Blackwell. And how is this a maximum security prison if Cole can clear the stage? She's useless! The benefits of removing this level include no shitty Cole level, the player wouldn't have to endure as much of Dr. Sander's whining, and there would be no filler conversation between Sander and Blackwell. Seriously, they talk about nothing. The only thing to get out of this level is Cole's observation that, unlike her, Dr. White's robots can have a reluctance to fight, which she sees as an intentional design error. This could foreshadow that in the future titles, Cole could end up being a more human character, but as with every other interesting idea in this game's story, it isn't developed. So after the filler level, Beck goes and shoots the crazy robots at Cherry Dynamics. Then White has a talk with Graham about the latter being too greedy. Graham then realizes that he's talking to Bill Blackwell, points this out, and White gets pretty mad, saying that he hasn't been called that for a long time. How long? Who knows. Why did he change his name? Again, who knows. He has contempt for his dad, we know that much, but not why, and the game simply doesn't explain anything to the player. So Bill here goes back to the lab and discovers that Trinity is hiding in the Robot Coliseum, go figure. Beck goes to fight Trinity, who goes from looking like Ghastly to Mother Elf to a mutant plant and then generic anime robot. Trinity is taken to a lab, receives a new shell, and I'm only assuming that she's not gonna start another national security crisis. Dr. White then meets Blackwell in the maximum security prison, and I'm assuming they didn't need to bring Cole this time, which only makes her level seem stupider. But anyways, White tells Blackwell that his advancements in artificial emotions and personalities will revolutionize robotics and benefit society. Blackwell remains pessimistic in his son, so White swears that he will show everyone who doubted him that he is capable, and it certainly seems like White is gonna go nutters in the next game. So, the two main problems in the story are A. The game hinting at past events that are never expanded upon, and B. A lot of the dialogue being atrocious and or filler. We don't know why Graham and Sander dislike each other. We don't know how long ago White left his job at Cherry Dynamics. I can only guess it's because Trinity was a failure, but we don't know when. We don't know when Dr. White changed his name. We don't know why he changed his name. We don't know why he and his dad aren't on good terms. We don't know Dr. White's backstory or Blackwell's backstory. I want to care about these characters and the world they live in, but the game won't let me because it has nothing to work with. Why couldn't we play a game based on the events the game is hinting at, and then have this one, Mighty Number 9, be the sequel? So, let's look at the characters. A lot of the dialogue is spam because it almost always does nothing useful for the plot or characters and is often downright annoying. Dr. Sander, for instance, is the biggest offender of this. He is certainly the worst character in this game because his personality amounts to extreme cowardice and his dialogue is limited to expressions and slang that no one even uses, which can come off as pretentious. Seriously, if even French people don't say sacre bleu, then why is Dr. Sander saying it? And who the hell says poppycock? He's constantly chiming in to say pointless shit and completely breaks the tone whenever the narrative attempts to be more serious. There's even a scene where he contacts his brother in Japan, and the situation at the start of the scene and the end of the scene are identical. His brother can't come to help the robot crisis, the characters don't learn anything new, and the game just wasted your time. Sander does absolutely nothing for the story, and removing him would make the game a lot better. Oh, and his voice. His fucking voice. It pisses me off. He has that voice, and it just enrages me. Cole also barely counts as a character due to having the personality of a walnut. She experiences no emotions and lacks the capacity to be entertained. But really, the rest of the cast is so static that the only thing that makes Cole more robotic than them is her voice. The text-to-speech program from Windows XP expresses more passion than Cole's voice actress. And coupled with her simple dialogue, listening to Cole is a boring chore. Like I said before, she may potentially end up growing as a character in future titles, learning about ethics and whatnot, but at the moment her only goal in life is to do what Dr. Sander says. The entire cast consists of generic stereotypes really. Blackwell is a grumpy old man, Graham is a greedy businessman, Beck is a reluctant upholder of justice, though he drops any reluctance after he's immediately convinced to fight. The other mighty numbers are caricatures whose whole character revolves around a shitty pun or joke. Dr. White is really the only one here with any potential. Sure, he's a clone of Dr. Light for the most part, but his backstory could be interesting, and I'd like to see what they do with a protagonist gone antagonist. But the name of the game is that it's not in the game. The characters are extremely underdeveloped, the world of this game is given no attention, and the majority of the dialogue is atrocious filler. Some good concepts are hinted at but are never expanded upon. A Mega Man game doesn't need a good story, but if you're going to bother with one, especially a more complex one, make it good. Presentation. Okay, there's no way around this. Mighty Number 9 looks trash. Sure, sometimes it looks presentable, I guess, but most of the time it consists of flat colors, low resolution textures, boring scenery, and seemingly uses less technologies than a PS2 game. Seriously, the only advantages Mighty Number 9 has over Mega Man X8 are the cell shading, bloom, and motion blur. And X8 is a PS2 game from 12 years ago. Hell, I don't even like the bloom and motion blur in this game, so I turned them off. It's funny because when we first got proper gameplay in 2014, we thought the game looked trash back then, but we also thought that since the release date was many months away, though not as many months as we would later find out, that the graphics would be improved by the time the game launches. We were horribly wrong because the graphics actually got worse. They got rid of volumetric lights, and the explosions now resemble a pepperoni and cheese pizza. Some might say they needed to make the graphics bad in order to maintain a steady 60 FPS, but there are games on current generation's hardware, the previous generation's hardware, and the generation before that look better than Mighty No. 9 and run at 60 FPS. But the worst part about it is that, aside from the Windows version, Mighty No. 9 can't keep a solid 60 FPS during gameplay. PS4 and Xbox One frequently drop to the low 50s and sometimes the low 40s. The Wii U, 360 and PS3 versions average 36 FPS, and I don't even want to know how it will run when it finally comes to the Vita and 3DS. It's a real shame because the character designs are actually pretty good, especially Beck's transformations, and some of the initial level art looked great. It's not as if these levels were doomed to fail, it's just that they aren't detailed enough and can look a bit repetitive at times. Arvy's stage, for instance, aside from sections with bottomless pits, looks exactly the same all throughout because it is entirely composed of a red structural frame. I wish they could have put as much effort into all of the levels as they did with brands, shades or cryos, as these stages are very dynamic with their aesthetics. The aesthetic variation in these stages is good. It keeps the levels interesting to your eyes. And I almost forgot to talk about the cutscenes. They're horrible. They're full of still camera shots, characters don't change their faces when they speak, they don't move their mouths, you see a lot of repeated poses, the voice acting is atrocious, and I've already gone over how bad the script is. Everything you see here is unacceptable. Plus, whenever something in the scene changes, the screen will fade to and from white, and then the new object or geometry appears. This also happens in gameplay, so all up it really makes the game's budget seem wasted. And sometimes it would just use concept art in place of proper 3D cutscenes. If the game just had more shaders, more detailed textures, richer backgrounds, and more varied environments, and a stable 60 FPS, and cutscenes that are at least as advanced as those seen in the original Halo from 2001, then the game would pass in the visuals department. But man, the sounds. Aside from the cringeworthy voice acting, with White and Beck being the only tolerable characters, the audio department is really good. The weapons all sound right, the dashing sounds right, the explosions sound right. It's all good. Nothing more to say here really. Speaking of audio, people seem to think that the soundtrack is mediocre or even bad. And I say fuck that shit. This soundtrack is superb. A lot of the music you're hearing in this video are my more favorite tracks from the game. You got good rock, electronica, and chiptune music in this game. And sure, Dina's stage music is atrocious and is trying too hard to be retro, and makes Sonic 4 synthesizers sound superb by comparison. But the rest of the soundtrack is good, I promise. Give it some time and it will grow on you. I love Pyro's theme for giving the X4 vibes, as well as the final boss theme. I love Bat's stage music, it's a really good chiptune electronica hybrid. I really like the final level's soft but impending atmospheric track. Quite relaxing but also daunting, and then the final boss music is a full-blown rock cover of that track. I love when games do stuff like this with their music. It reminds me of the first Mega Man ZX game, where every time there was a sad moment, the sad music played, and then the final level's theme was an electronica remix of that. It was a reminder that the player was facing everything that's been wrong in the main character's life. Sure, Mighty No. 9 doesn't exactly have the thematics that ZX did, but this is still welcome. Oh, and the main theme is just so good, and it also holds sentimental value. It takes us back to 2013, the time of joy where we had so much hope for this project. We just came out of a dark age for Mega Man, and we thought, there is future for this series. But it's sad to see how the game has turned out, but that main theme will always give me goosebumps. Listen to each track between 2 to 5 times. I'll guarantee you'll walk out of it with at least one song you'll never forget. Though I understand if you don't like wannabe retro music, and I'll admit that I'm not the biggest fan of it, which is why my favorite tracks from this game are the ones that don't try too hard to be old school. I would have preferred if the soundtrack sounded like the music from the remastered tracks Rockman Zero albums or the ZX Tunes albums, but I still like retro music, the genuine sounding kind. So I was happy to see that this game has an option for a chiptune soundtrack in the image of the NES soundchip. It sounds alright for the most part. Some songs become mediocre, some songs sound just as good, and some of them sound even better. Mike's stage in chiptune is a blessing to the ears, and I prefer it over the original version, and the final boss music makes a perfect transition to 8-bit. But yeah, overall, the game will disappoint your eyes, but please your ears. So, why does this game inherently piss off so many people? On the surface, Mighty No. 9 seems like a generally inoffensive platformer, but it is so much more than that. Capcom, the publisher/developer of the Mega Man franchise, decided to cancel every Mega Man game they had in development early in this decade. But no, it wasn't all at once. They couldn't let Mega Man die quietly. They dragged this out for 2 years straight. Every time we thought, oh, it sucks that this game got cancelled, but at least we still have this game to get excited about, it got fucked again by Capcom. The fan base was infuriated, but then we had the greatest source of hope we could have ever imagined.
これが私たちとファンの皆様の新作マイティナンバー9です。
Keiji Inafune, former series producer of Mega Man, who left Capcom in 2010 to start his own company, Concept, proposed Mighty No. 9 to the world in August of 2013 via Kickstarter. The hype was enormous. A new Mega Man game. Not only did the Kickstarter meet its goal of $900,000 in less than 40 hours, but people would eventually fund the game to $4 million. So after this much funding, developing a simple platforming game in 2 years would be a piece of cake, right? Well, things started going downhill. The first warning sign was hiring a Tumblr-grade feminist to be the totalitarian dictator of the official forums. She banned people who disagreed with her politics and banned people for calling out the fact that the only reason she got the job because a friend of hers was working on a game. If it wasn't obvious enough that she was unqualified for the job, she had never even played a Mega Man game before. Also, access to the forums was a privilege given by backing the game. So when people were banned from the forums, they decided to cancel their backings, and the game supposedly lost tens of thousands of dollars worth of funding. Even so, the crowdfunding was such a success that even if no one bought the game, it would still be a $3.1 million profit. Despite this, Inafune decided that during Mighty No. 9's development that they would be making a live-action movie based on the game, an animated series based on the game, a spiritual successor to Mega Man Legends called Red Ash, this was a crowdfunded project, and an anime based on Red Ash, also crowdfunded. The Red Ash anime was shockingly enough funded, but the game wasn't.
We didn't know what it was going to be aside from a Mega Man Legends clone, and that wasn't enough to sell us.
But a Chinese company did pick up the Red Ash game, so it will most likely turn out to be a free-to-play Android game that completely falls short of what it was initially supposed to be. This is mismanagement at its purest, and then I can only assume that Concept spent all $4 million of the game's funding on whores and cocaine, so they couldn't self-publish the game, so they got Deep Silver to distribute it. My theory on why the game was delayed so much was that with no actual money left over to develop the game on, they had to rely on a few $1,000s maximum a month from Deep Silver to fund porting the game to every platform available. And last but not least, Deep Silver's incredible marketing team unleashed to the world the extremely cringeworthy Masterclass trailer that featured repeated use of the word awesome, shitty humor aside from a subtle lesbian joke, obnoxious advertising of the dash mechanic, and, I quote, "make the bad guys cry like an anime fan on prom night." Looking at the comments section of any Mega Man video will show you that a large majority of the fans are weeaboos/otakus. I don't want to sound like a dick, but it's true. And if you look at Mega Man throughout the years, it's very obvious that this came out of Japan. Most Mega Man fans like Japanese shit. The Mega Man fanbase isn't what it was like in the 80s, where it mostly consisted of Western children who didn't even know what the fuck anime was. In fact, the only thing they probably knew about Japan was how they attacked the West in World War II. But now, it's full of otakus who have been introduced to the series in the 21st century. The last group of people you want to alienate when marketing your product is your own target audience. You know you messed up when your game makes people skeptical of crowdfunded games. What a total PR failure. In conclusion, I like Mighty No. 9. It feels like a Mega Man game. The gameplay is fast and fun, the level design is mostly good, and the music is great.
But I understand why I'm a minority in saying this.
And I sympathize with those who dislike this game. It absolutely failed to live up to the promises and expectations, with so much potential thrown out the window, the terrible graphics, obvious flaws that should have been resolved, confused and undeveloped writing, and all of the controversies. The end result is a big screw you to anyone who backed the game, and an utter disappointment to anyone expecting a great Mega Man game. It's still a good Mega Man game in my opinion, but I can only recommend it to the most hardcore of Mega Man fans who absolutely need to quench their Mega Man thirst. But wait for a price drop, because I don't think this game is worth $20. I just hope that the buffoons behind this game can somehow get it together for the sequel and deliver the Mega Man successor we were initially hyped for. But judging by the critical roasting of this game and the abysmal PR, the consumer skepticism will be so high that any smart publisher will be afraid to dump more than $500,000 into a sequel. If you tried this game when it came out and you hated it just as I did, do revisit it with an open mind, because you might find something you like. But alas, this is a sad time for Mega Man fans once again. This is Dandy, telling you that Mighty No. 9 is not dandy enough. Peace.
And if you're interested in a new, good Mega Man game, do keep up with this fan game called Mega Man ZX Genesis. It's a prequel to the ZX games and is definitely making up for the impending 10-year absence of a new ZX game. If you haven't played ZX or ZX Advent, you're really missing out, because they are gems, Advent of which is my favorite Mega Man game. The guys behind this are called Team Einherjar, so please show them some support by liking their Facebook page and subscribing to their YouTube channel. Click the annotations for the relevant links. I'm not being paid to do this, I just want to give this project some attention.
ファンの力を最大限に生かして、やっぱり自分たちのやりたいゲームで、自分たちが作りたいゲーム、それをみんなに示すことができればな。キックスターターのおかげで僕たちの夢もファンの夢も叶う時が来ると思います。みんなで力を合わせていいゲームを作っていきましょう。みんなの力を貸してください。キックスターターで夢を叶えましょう。